It comes from 26,000 yards away, beyond the curve of the Earth itself. The weapon rains down with terrifying precision. Yet there's nothing on the horizon, on enemy warship, no attacker in sight. It's June 1942, and naval warfare has just changed forever. Aboard the minesweeper, HMS Hibby, sailors frantically scan the Mediterranean waters as explosions erupt around them, sending walls of water towering over their side. HMS Hibby is part of Operation Harpoon, a desperate Royal Navy mission carrying vital supplies to Malta. The besieged island fortress is barely holding on against Axis forces hammering the Mediterranean. But the most deadly threat comes from an enemy the British can't even see. In the summer of 1940, the Mediterranean was safe and secure in Allied hands. To the west, the French Navy dominated the basin, while to the east, Admiral Cunningham's mighty British Mediterranean fleet protected supply routes to Egypt, Palestine, and the island of Malta, a crucial outpost that allowed the Allies to strike directly at Axis convoys moving between Italy and North Africa. But when Italy entered the war, and France surrendered, Malta, once protected by a ring of friendly fleets, was now at the center of an increasingly hostile sea. The island needed supplies to keep Egypt and the Suez Canal secure, and the Axis forces were determined to make sure they never arrived. With every passing month, convoys headed toward the island came under heavier, more coordinated attacks. Submarines lurked along the routes, fast torpedo boats struck at night, and bombers waited overhead for any ship attempting to break through. By early 1942, access to supply runs to North Africa was gaining ground, while Malta's striking power was shrinking fast. Laffa raid surged past 5,000 tons of bombs in a single month. While British submarines were being forced out and airfields lay in ruins, reconnaissance flights were blind to most Axis movements. The last straw came on March 21, 1942, when convoy MW-10-5, merchant ships escorted by a heavy screen of cruisers and destroyers, set out from Alexandria to Malta with just over 5,000 tons of supplies. Though the group fought its way past the Italian fleet during the Second Battle of Syr, the delay proved fatal. Within 2 days, every merchant ship was sunk or burning in port. With destroyers and cruisers stretched thin, London ruled out any convoy to Malta in May. The island would have to hang on until the Admiralty knew what to do. In the meantime, Axis bombers pounded its docks, airfields, and naval facilities. The bombing then turned inward, striking barracks, camps, supply depots, and crossroads in what looked like preparation for an invasion. In that month alone, Axis aircraft flew over 9,500 sorties, compared to just 388 by the Royal Air Force. By June 1942, Malta, the island that had once threatened the lifeline feeding Rommel's forces, was faltering. Food reserves were thinning, and the population, both military and civilian, faced rationing that grew harsher by the week. Occasional aircraft made the dangerous run from distant bases, but they could bring only so much. Now or never. In early June, seeing no other option, the British Chiefs of Staff and the Admiralty prepared for a Flusco two-pronged naval effort to resupply the island from opposite ends of the Mediterranean. From the west, Operation Harpoon would sail from Gibraltar, while from the east Operation Vigorous would depart from Alexandria. Everyone involved in the planning knew that at least one convoy, and most likely both, might not reach its destination. Harpoon's convoy consisted of 6 merchant ships. To protect them, the Royal Navy assembled Force X, a close escort led by Rear Admiral Alvin Thomas Buckley Curtis, aboard the light cruiser HMS Kenya, joined by the anti-aircraft cruiser HMS Cairo and the light cruiser HMS Liverpool. The screen included destroyers HMS Bedouin, HMS Partridge, and HMS Ethereal, along with minesweepers HMS Hay, Speedy, Rye, and Swa. The carrier, HMS Eagle, part of the broader covering force, had just flown in additional Spitfires to Malta and turned back, while the battleship HMS Malaya and other heavy units remained positioned to deter surface attacks, though they would not continue with the convoy into the Sicilian Narrows. In the weeks leading up to Harpoon and its eastern counterpart, the British launched a coordinated air effort to clear a path. Beginning in late May, they struck enemy airfields, rushed Spitfires to Malta, and scattered bombers and scouts across the Mediterranean. A sabotage team slipped into Crete. But for all the planning and firepower, the convoy would still be sailing straight into some of the world's most dangerous waters. The Harpoon convoy slipped out of Gibraltar on June 12, 1942. 6 merchant ships packed with food, fuel, and ammunition. Trilus, Birdwin, Harari, Tannar, Chant, and the tanker Kentucky. Around them moved Force 10, while further out, Force W kept watch. All through June 13, the convoy pressed eastward, engines steady, following the North African coast. The merchant ships held tight formation and were screened by their escorts as forces across the sea watched and waited. Italian reconnaissance planes picked up the group from a distance, and every port and airfield in Sicily, Sardinia, and Tunisia stood on high alert. ready to strike. In the Black Mediterranean night, at precisely 2:52 a.m. on June 14th, the Italian submarine Oashik was the first to directly attack the convoy, firing a series of torpedoes that detonated prematurely in the water. Just as the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, an Italian reconnaissance flight roared overhead and spotted the convoy just 50 nautical miles north of Cape Buc. The aircraft banked hard, positioned between Algiers and Bizerte. But before it could transmit a report, a pair of British fighters from HMS Eagle sent the enemy plane plunging into the sea. Nerves were running high among the escort vessels. In the confusion, HMS Escapade detected what appeared to be a periscope cutting through the waves and opened fire, only to discover they had targeted friendly HMS Westcott returning from refueling. During a separate incident, the Italian submarine Giada tracked the convoy through its periscope and at 6:05 a.m. fired 2 torpedoes toward HMS Eagle. Inside Eagle's cramped control room, crewmen pressed headphones to their ears, counted 3 distinct explosions, and marked their charts with what they believed was a confirmed hit. The morning sun brought no rest as another Italian spotter plane found the convoy now about 90 nautical miles southwest of Cape Tolada in Sardinia. The report reached an aeronautica base recently strengthened by nearly 200 bombers and fighters. Soon the distinctive shapes of Savoio Marchetti SM-79 torpedo bombers appeared on the horizon, engines growling as they closed on the formation and flew as low as possible. Once close enough, their torpedoes tore into the merchant ship Tinbar and ripped into the plates of HMS Liverpool. Seeing her wounded sister, Antelope moved alongside, passing heavy cables to the cruiser. With no way to make it to Malta, the pair began a slow, vulnerable journey back to Gibraltar. As threats multiplied from air and sea, the main covering force turned back toward Gibraltar later that day, unable to push through the Strait of Sicily. The still functional fast minesweeper, Welshman, pressed on alone. Her extra speed was her only defense against lurking submarines and circling aircraft as she reached Malta, delivered her cargo of ammunition, and immediately turned back to rejoin what remained of the convoy escort. In the night between the 14th and 15th, the battered Harpoon convoy cut through the black waters of the Sicilian Channel, hugging the Tunisian coastline on the final stretch of their journey. At 5:20 a.m., with dawn about to begin, the convoy cut through calm seas 25 miles southwest of Pantelleria when Cairo's radio operator picked up an urgent reconnaissance report. 2 enemy cruisers were bearing down from the north, closing fast and only miles away. The sudden report confirmed the admiral's worst fears. Italian Admiral De Zara's 7th Division had found them, and the force was substantial. Cruisers Mugio, Attendolo and Eugenio di Savoia, with the 10th Destroyer Flotillas Orsini and Premuta forming the forward screen. Behind them came the 14th Destroyer Flotillas Vivaldi and Malocello, completing a large enemy formation. Just as the first light crept across the water at 5:30 a.m., lookouts on both sides of the convoy called out sightings nearly simultaneously. 10 minutes later, the morning silence shattered when Eugenio di Savoia's forward batteries erupted in flame, shells screaming across 16,000 meters of open water toward Cairo. All around Hardy's flagship, towering plumes of seawater erupted as near misses sent spray across her decks, and within seconds every warship in both formations opened fire. The Italian cruisers accelerated to 32 knots, engines driving them forward as they pounded the British escorts without pause. With this move, Da Zara's strategy became clear as Malocello and Vivaldi peeled away to pursue the vulnerable merchant ships. Under Hardy's orders, destroyers began laying dense smoke screens, sending billowing clouds to create a protective blanket for the merchants. Now, more or less hidden, Hardy ordered the convoy to alter course toward the Tunisian coast with the minesweepers escorting them to safety as fast as possible. For a full hour, the warships howled across the open water, with the Italian cruisers sustaining light damage, scorched and upper works torn, but all remained combat effective. The British escort, however, suffered much worse. Hums Paduan took multiple hits that tore through her hull, leaving compartments flooded and fires raging. Partridge also absorbed punishing blows that reduced her speed and fighting capability. Even the sturdy Cairo shuddered under the impact of Italian shells, cold seawater flooding into damaged compartments below her waterline. In the midst of the melee, the destroyers, Vivaldi and Malocello, hunted the merchantman that had turned west-southwest and were met head-on by British destroyers, their guns ready and blazing to protect the vulnerable cargo ships. At 6 a.m., facing unexpectedly heavy resistance, the 2 enemy ships turned away, a decision they would soon regret. A single British shell found its mark on Vivaldi, smashing into her forward engine room and causing high flames to erupt from her interior, visible for miles across the morning sea. Feeling the impact, Commander Ignazio Castorani, commander of the flotilla, ordered Malocello to withdraw to safety. However, Malocello's captain refused to abandon his sister ship and instead laid protective smoke screens around the wounded Vivaldi, while her guns still fired defiantly at the pursuing British destroyers. Only then could both Italian vessels slip away from the engagement, damaged and defeated. Following a very brief respite, the air above the Mediterranean erupted with the terrifying drone of German RHY-88 bombers diving toward the scattered convoy. Merchant ship Chant took a direct hit, bombs punching through her deck and igniting her cargo fuel, coal, and ammunition, so the captain gave the order to abandon ship. Within moments, men scrambled down ropes and nets into waiting lifeboats, while flames consumed the vessel from within. The tanker Kentucky fared little better when a German bomb crashed into the sea mere yards from her hull. The underwater shockwave stopped her propellers suddenly, leaving her dead in the water. Quickly, minesweeper HMS Hay moved to help, passing heavy cables to begin the slow, vulnerable task of towing the massive vessel. Just out in the chaos, the Italian cruisers Monte Catoli and Eugenio di Savoia outmaneuvered the British formation and closed to as near as 6,500 yards. Perfect range for naval gunnery. Every gun, even 37mm anti-aircraft guns, joined the barrage, all firing in unison at maximum range. With that order, Admiral de Zara saw the tactical advantage and directed his ships to swing wide to the southwest, letting his cruisers line up broadsides against the exposed flank of the British escort. Then, in perfect timing, he turned north, slipping through the British smoke screens and using them to mask his own approach. And he wasn't finished. He directed his formation to the very edge of a known minefield. By 8:30 a.m., with no Italian warships visible, Captain Hardy worked to regroup his scattered force. The merchantman had fled toward Tunisian waters with their minesweeper escorts, and the challenge now was bringing the formation back together. A difficult task given the damaged escorts. Bedouin and Partridge moved slowly, their hulls torn, fires extinguished but leaving scorched compartments throughout both vessels. Kentucky remained under tow by HMS Hay, moving at a turtle's pace in perilous waters. As Captain Hardy assessed his options, German aircraft returned, this time stopping merchant ship Birdwin's engines cold. The leader had no choice but to admit it, but damaged Kentucky and Birdwin would never reach Malta, their painfully slow speed endangering the entire convoy. Orders were given to scuttle Kentucky and Birdwin, transfer their crews to the remaining vessels, and then press on to Malta, with the few ships that still had a fighting chance. Meanwhile, Admiral de Zara reached his planned ambush point at the northern end of the minefield. Finding no British ships, he reunited with his destroyers, Ascari and Orsini, before turning southwest toward towering columns of black smoke from SS Chant staining the horizon. The ship on the brink of succumbing to its damaged dot. At 11:55 a.m., the Italian formation arrived at the scene, while the burning hulks of Kentucky and Birdwin dotted the seascape. The Azara focused on a more valuable target, Partridge, slowly towing the severely damaged Bedouin with the minesweepers nearby. Only 20 minutes later, seeing the approaching Italian warships, Partridge cut the tow lines to Bedouin and turned west, accelerating away. A difficult decision that saved the former but sealed the latter's fate. From nearly 30,000 yards away, Monte Catoli opened fire, her guns flashing on the now sunny horizon. Aboard HMS Hay, officials watched in disbelief as the first salvo landed near her, and before most even knew what hit them, columns of water erupted around the ship. Then one shell slammed into her hull. The already wounded Bedouin, now without hope of escape, received the concentrated fire of both Italian cruisers' shells crashed into her damaged hull, igniting new fires and flooding more compartments. And a final blow would come later, in the shape of an Italian SM-79 torpedo bomber. At 2:20 p.m., with their mission complete, the Italian squadron set course for home, and the waters of the Sicilian Channel gradually calmed. The naval battle of Pantelleria was over. As dust settled over the Mediterranean, the battered ships of Operation Harpoon limped toward Malta's harbor entrance, and the day's brutal fighting had shredded their carefully laid plans. The minesweepers should have gone first, clearing the path while Cairo and her escorts turned back for Gibraltar. Now, with ammunition nearly depleted from hours of fighting off Italian warships and waves of aircraft, the convoy had no choice but to enter the harbor and restock before German bombers returned at first light. As the motor launches took the lead, HMS Cairo stopped at the harbor entrance and directed the merchant ships Ari and Troas to proceed ahead. The crew of Troas watched with relief as the shore grew closer than ever. Then suddenly, at only 1,200 feet, she struck a mine. The explosion damaged her hull, fortunately hitting a coal-filled hold and limiting the flooding. And despite the damage, she managed to continue into the harbor. Behind them, disaster multiplied. The destroyer, Badsworth, hit another mine, her bow crumpling. Then Krywiak struck another, the explosion tearing through her hull with enough force to doom her as men scrambled for lifeboats, while she began to list. The minesweeper Hay hit yet another mine, followed by matchless. Even Ari, so close to safety, struck one in her final approach. From shore, many spotters watched with a mixture of hope and horror. The island had been starving for months, and every ship that sank meant thousands of tons of precious supplies lost. Yet 2 ships pushed through, despite everything. Inside Malta's harbor, a small army of men, soldiers, workers, and civilians alike, All gaunt from months of ever smaller rations waited the ship's arrival. Smoke generators pumped out thick clouds to conceal the arriving ships from sudden air attack. With Ari and Troas finally secure at their berths, the dock burst into controlled chaos as people swarmed the vessels, opened hatches, set up hoists, and prepared to empty every hold as quickly as human hands could manage. The rhythm of unloading never stopped. Every able man worked 12-hour shifts, passing crates hand to hand, rolling barrels, and hauling sacks of flour, and additional specialists were flown in that same night from Alexandria. For 5 days, 3,500 tons of food, ammunition, and fuel, the very lifeblood of Malta's resistance, moved daily from the ships to shore to be unloaded, dispersed, and hidden in rock shelters across the island. In the end, Operation Harpoon marked one of the few surface victories for the Italian Navy during the war. But the convoy was decimated. 1 destroyer sunk, another badly damaged, and 3 more ships damaged. Of the 6 merchant ships that departed Gibraltar, only to reach Malta, back in the Allied port Cairo, and the surviving escorts finally returned, scorched and battered, while Bedouin sat in dry dock, wounded but fixable, with a month of repairs ahead before she would be declared seaworthy again. One more battle-scarred veteran of the war's most dangerous sea lane. And though the 3,500 tons offloaded were far fewer than the 50,000 expected, those 2 ships brought just enough to keep the island fighting. The following week, wireless operators throughout the Mediterranean relayed the news that Malta would hold, though not for long, and everything depended on the next attempt, Operation Pedestal, a resupply mission that would decide if the island could survive at all.